Anxiety recovery is much simpler than you've been led to believe. In fact, you could break it down to 3 simple stages. And the funny thing is, your therapist probably hasn't even explained this to you. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Tim Box, mind coach and anxiety therapist. And one of the things that has always surprised me about the therapeutic profession is how little agreement there seems to be about anxiety recovery. Ask 10 therapists how to overcome anxiety and you'll probably get 10 different answers. Some will tell you to challenge your thoughts, others will tell you to manage your symptoms. Some will encourage you to face your fears, while others will encourage you to avoid certain situations until you feel stronger. Now, I'm not saying those approaches never help, but after working with anxiety clients for many years, I think there's a much simpler roadmap that sits underneath all of them. It's a roadmap that explains why people get stuck, and more importantly, why they eventually recover. Today, I want to walk you through the 3 important stages of anxiety recovery, and don't be surprised if this is the first time you've heard about these stages, because in my experience, most therapists simply aren't aware of them. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you'll know that I don't think anxiety recovery is about becoming a different person. I don't think it's about building confidence, and I don't think it's about overcoming anxiety or beating it into submission. I think recovery follows a fairly predictable path. The problem is that most people never get shown the map. Instead, they're given techniques to manage anxiety without ever understanding what anxiety actually is or why they're still stuck. So in this video, I want to show you the roadmap I see clients travel every day. You'll see how each stage naturally leads to the next, and by the end, you'll probably realize that this path is a lot easier to follow than you've been led to believe. And the really good news here is that you don't actually have to do anything. You just have to understand anxiety in a different way. The first thing that has to change is the way we think about anxiety itself. One of the most common phrases I hear is, "I have anxiety." Now, that sounds perfectly normal because it's how we tend to talk about it. But think about what that sentence implies. It suggests anxiety is something you've acquired, almost like a condition that's attached itself to you. And that's simply not true. You don't have anxiety, you feel anxious. They're very different ideas. Anxiety is an emotion, not an illness. If I asked you whether you have happiness or whether you have sadness, it would sound like an odd question because we simply don't talk about emotions using that language. Anxiety belongs in exactly the same category. Sometimes it's mild, sometimes it's overwhelming, sometimes it feels completely out of proportion, but it's still an emotion. And once you stop viewing it as an illness or a malfunction, it starts to become much less mysterious. So stage 1 is to understand that no matter how anxious you feel and how often you feel that way, you're not ill. That small but vital shift in our understanding naturally leads to the second stage. If anxiety is an illness, what exactly are we so afraid of? Before we go any further, have you checked out the members area of this channel? In there you'll find hours and hours of extra anxiety and mind coaching content, including my full control system training and the Clear Your Head Anxiety Relief Program. You'll also get full access to exclusive weekly live Q&As. It's just £9 for a full month's access, and you can join by hitting the button on the homepage or clicking the link in the description of this video. See you there. Most people don't actually come to see me because they're anxious about work, relationships, or their health. They come because they're frightened of how anxious they feel. Somewhere along the way, anxiety itself became the thing they were trying to escape. This is called second fear, and it's the loop we get caught in when we've started to interpret our anxiety response as an indicator of illness. When that happens, every flutter in your stomach suddenly matters. Every strange sensation feels like a threat. Every anxious thought becomes something to examine and question. You experience some physical or emotional point of concern, and the idea that this is a flare-up of your illness rather than a natural emotional response causes an increase of concern, triggering the stress response, which simply creates more of the physical sensations that troubled you in the first place. It's a feedback loop, and it's what has so many people stuck experiencing high anxiety far longer than they would otherwise need to. But if anxiety is simply a healthy emotional response, as we discovered in stage 1, then however uncomfortable it might be, there's nothing there that can actually harm you. That doesn't mean you'll enjoy feeling anxious. I don't particularly enjoy feeling cold, but that doesn't mean feeling cold is dangerous. And it certainly doesn't mean I need to regulate my temperature as if my life depended on it. Once we've understood anxiety to be a natural emotional process, we can stop fearing that process as if it's unnatural or unhealthy. And recovery starts moving surprisingly quickly when anxiety stops being interpreted as a threat. So stage 2 is to stop regarding feeling anxious as something to be afraid of. From there, stage 3 is a natural and even inevitable final step. Once the understanding settles in that anxiety is of no threat and we stop actively fighting feeling anxious, something else begins to change almost by itself. You lose interest in checking how anxious you are. Think back to a period in your life before anxiety became a problem. You probably felt anxious quite regularly, before an exam, before a difficult conversation, before doing anything, in fact, that even remotely mattered. But you didn't have an anxiety issue back then. Why not? Well, the difference wasn't that you never felt anxious. The difference was that you never flagged it as a problem. You never thought to check how anxious you were because it simply wasn't important. That's where recovery eventually takes you. Not to a place where anxiety has disappeared forever, but to a place where you stop wondering whether it's still there. The only reason you keep checking how anxious you are is because you perceive it to be something to be afraid of. Your need to feel safe demands that you keep scanning for it, which is, of course, as we now know, the only reason it perpetuates and spirals out of control. Once anxiety is understood to be entirely benign, then your mind no longer has any need to draw your attention to it. People often tell me they're waiting for the day they wake up and suddenly realize they've recovered. But it doesn't happen like that. More often, they look back one day and realize they haven't checked how anxious they are for weeks. Life quietly became more interesting than monitoring themselves. And that's why they stopped noticing anxiety so much. Not because they forced it away, but because it had simply stopped being anything worth paying attention to. And that's the final stage, the one that happens outside of your awareness. At some point, you lose interest in anxiety and how anxious you might be from one moment to the next. So if I could leave you with one thought from the video, it would be this. Recovery isn't really about becoming somebody who never feels anxious. It's about gradually removing the misunderstanding that made anxiety seem frightening in the first place. Once you understand that anxiety is an emotion rather than an illness, you no longer need to fear it. When you no longer fear it, you quickly lose interest in it. And it's that lack of interest that finally breaks the feedback loop and frees you from the anxiety cycle you've been caught in. If the ideas discussed in this video have resonated with you and you'd like my personal guidance to help you get the other side of anxiety, then follow the link in the description of this video to book a free, no obligation consultation. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for weekly videos on anxiety and understanding how the mind works. But that's it for this one. I'm Tim Box. Always remember, be kind to your mind. I'll see you next time.